Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mothballing the Coliseum, changes at Overton Park, and remembering Burnell Smith. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. We'll talk about, there's a whole lot of news going on. I think the lead story, though, Bill, is the proposal, which we'll get into more next week with Paul Young from the city of Memphis when he's on the show. But the city has started to roll out its plan for the fairgrounds, and that includes the Coliseum. And I think for a lot of people, the Coliseum's the headline because the mayor's proposal, and I'll let you fill in the details, is essentially to mothball the Coliseum. Not tear it down, but also not put the money into it from this TDZ, this Tourism Development Zone, that some people wanted. So tell us about the Coliseum situation, then we'll go into some of the other parts of the plan of the fairgrounds.
Right. The city, the administration of Mayor Jim Strickland says that they really don't see a plan at this point that they want to go down the road on and start operations and actually operating the Coliseum again as an active venue plays into this, because the city said before we do that, before we have this ongoing expense, we want to make sure we've got the best plan, and they're just not sure that being part of a youth sports facility or complex on the fairgrounds is actually the direction that they want to go with the Coliseum. There might be some other direction. So for the interim, until they have time to devote to that, they're going to concentrate on some other parts of the plan. And much to, I think, a lot of people's surprise, a lot of those other parts are not on the fairgrounds proper. They're outside of the fairgrounds boundaries in the neighborhoods around it. Orange Mound is what comes to mind immediately. There's an access issue there because there is a railroad yard between the fairgrounds and Orange Mound to the south. Well, the city wants to improve the entrances that go under the railroad yard into the neighborhoods. It also is going to explore using Old Melrose High School as some kind of facility that's connected to what happens at the fairgrounds in terms of youth sports tournaments. But the really big philosophical thing here is that the city is trying to balance hosting these tournaments, which bring in a lot of money and a lot of people from out of town for regional and national sports and amateur tournaments, with everyday use by Memphians. Because right out of the gate during the Harrington administration and into the Wharton administration, they made such a push about these tournaments that it created this backlash among Memphians who were saying, well, okay, you're doing this for other people who come here, not for Memphians.
And this youth sports, I mean, it is its own business, and people with kids who've had kids play in these competitive leagues, what jokingly called professional sports by some. It's expensive. There's travel baseball, travel volleyball, travel soccer, and you go around from tournament to tournament. And that's what they're talking. They're talking about on the old Liberty Land area. Is it $80 million? As much as $80 million. Yeah. They don't have a vendor yet. There's still a lot to be filled in. But that seems to be, they're all in on the youth sports and what that will do in terms of bringing people and tourism dollars. All this is based on the TDZ, and we talked about it, I think, last week in terms of the downtown TDZ, which is sales tax money that goes to the state that otherwise would stay with the state coffers but comes back. Do I have that right, Bill?
To finance the development, the public part of the development.
Right. So downtown they're using it for things like the riverfront, things like the the Pinch District, all kinds of things down there. That's what they're talking about here. And they've always, to tap into that money, they've always had this challenge of, well, we've got to do something that's going to generate new sales tax dollars, because that's what you get. You get the money that is new over and above the baseline. So the youth sports, we had Kevin Kane on before talking about all that. And it is interesting that $40 million they've earmarked, Toby, for the neighborhood. So Cooper Young, Orange Mound, Access, I think that's different. As Bill said, that feels different to me than things we've heard before, where it was all about what's going to be on the fairgrounds.
Certainly.
This is more about at least an effort to integrate all the neighborhoods, integrate the fairgrounds into all the neighborhoods, and vice versa.
Right, but it's still going to be a tightrope to walk, I think. To Bill's point, the entire project is $160 million. Half of that is just for that exclusive playground over there for these travel teams for the youth sports facility. And at this point, we're still reading the tea leaves because the final plan doesn't come out until Monday, and maybe after that things will be a little different. But just kind of connecting a few dots that came out this week. Earlier this week, Mayor Jim Strickland was talking about how much money it costs to be on these travel teams, how much money they might bring in. So there's already kind of shows you how much income you have to play these things. And then on Wednesday, Paul Young was talking about it, and he said that we do want more access for people in the surrounding neighborhoods, but said specifically that the youth sports facility would be out of bounds for neighborhood kids, so it's not really
Unless
doing
they're
anything
on one of those
unless
teams.
they're on one of those teams.
Yeah.
So it's not that part. Half of the entire thing is not doing anything directly for the kids in Orange Mound or Cooper Young or Beltline. Right. So if we're in a state now where we're talking about, we're fighting for tens of thousands of dollars for inclusivity on Beale Street for the Beale Street Bucks program, and they're proposing $80 million of exclusivity over there for the fairgrounds. It's going to be a careful debate to watch.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, I mean, I would say one of my children did travel volleyball. I mean, it was a lot. I mean, it was a couple thousand bucks just to be on the team, and then you travel, so you're staying in hotels and you're going to restaurants, and that's what they're trying to tap into. Mm-hmm. We did it 1 year and only 1 year. But people do it, and it is a big business. I mean, there is a sense that, we're missing out on that. What that could then fund, and people like Kevin Kane from the Convention Visitors Bureau and other advocates for this have said, is it then helps to fund the infrastructure. It helps to fund things like, they're going to put hotel, we're going to put maybe a little bit of retail on the Central Avenue part. And again, Paul Young alluded to be fair to him, and again, he'll be on the show next week, he alluded to amenities that would be for the neighborhood, that it would not just be an exclusive youth sports facility. And I think you're right. And we'll know more about that youth sports facility and who's going to run that and what details of the business plan. We'll know that, I think, in December. Is that right, Bill?
Right.
Yeah. They're doing a pro forma on all of that. They have an expert, a consultant who's come in to work with him. So it's a little later time frame. They won't have that in until December. That will influence the proposal they take to the State Building Commission to actually activate the tourism development zone, and that'll be in Nashville come January.
And let's come full circle back to the Coliseum. And Toby, you and I and some other folks were on a tour. The Coliseum Coalition, a kind of an advocacy group that has put out a full business plan, has been arguing for. We've had Chooch Picard and others on the show over the last few years that the Coliseum be renovated. They were very disappointed in this plan in the sense that it did not take any of that TDZ money and put it into the Coliseum for all the sort of ideas that they've put forward. It does not, however, tear the Coliseum down, which was a fear of other people. Right. I mean, if there's a middle path in this, the city seemed to try. And basically, they said it was partly economic. $8 to $10 million to tear down the Coliseum. The city has it at, $30 to $40 million to truly renovate the Coliseum. The Coliseum Coalition thinks that can be done for more like $20, $25 million. But instead, for $500,000, they repair the roof and they kind of mothball it, and they essentially push the decision down the road.
Right. And, like you said, it's a middle ground. When we were in there, it looks like somebody held an event in there a year ago and walked away. I'm no structural engineer. It looks solid. It looks safe. But, again, I don't know all the ins and outs of all that stuff. The coalition, those folks, they seem to think that, it could easily be brought up to ADA standards and everything else. But it'll be interesting to see, because Paul Young said yesterday that he wants to work with them, to come up with a business plan, to come up with a plan for the Coliseum. So it'll be interesting to see if those two groups actually get together and come up with a solution. It
also gets in, and we've talked about this and we've obviously written about it, you get back to the Grizzlies, Bill, and the Grizzlies have this right, and I'm going to screw it up, but basically, they've got in their deal, their agreement for the FedEx Forum, that any facility more than about 5,000 5,000 seats, anything over that can't be built with public money without their permission. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah. That's and there are some differences on the interpretation of the exact
Thank you,
language.
yes.
Is it a right of first refusal? Well, under the working interpretation that the Grizzlies seem to be using, it's more than that. It's no, you can't do a venue that is 5,000 seats plus.
And this came up when Elvis Presley Enterprises proposed and then pulled back from a proposal to do an arena that would be, around 5,000 seats down by Graceland.
This is not people saying, oh, there's that language, we better not cross that line. This is someone who's actually had experience with the Grizzlies saying, we're enforcing the agreement on it. So it played some role. It was out there, but the city's position is that that is not what has been driving the Coliseum plans ultimately, that there does need to be some downsizing of it. But by the same token, they're not necessarily sold on the idea of a 5,000 seat venue for sports tournaments that would have maybe 3 courts in the Coliseum, which is not enough for one of these tournament sites. But you build an annex onto the Coliseum, and then you have even more courts there.
And they've talked, it is, Toby, to go through, and I know you've gone through there too, Bill, but we just so happen to do it together. Their enthusiasm, their love of that place, the memories of bands that were there, this were the dressing room where Jerry Lawler would get ready, this is where the Beatles were. You do kind of, I honestly kind of got swept up, and I would love to, there's a part of me that says, oh my gosh, there's so much history here, and people have all these memories of first concerts and best concerts and so on.
Right.
That then pushes up against the hard realities of, does the city need another arena? Does it fit with the youth sports?
Right.
And is the city in the business right now, even though it's TDZ money, of putting $30 or $40 million towards this other arena?
Yeah.
It's such a tough one.
It is, and the coalition has always said that we're not in this for nostalgia. This is a big amenity. There are a lot of memories here, and a lot of folks have great memories. But we're in it for kind of historic preservation. This is a great, solid building that could be good for Midtown and could be for Greater Memphis. And that's the reason when they came up with their business plan, they said it's mainly youth sports. It's for graduations, concerts, all those other things are kind of secondary, tertiary, So they're trying to build a business model, not to say that we're in this thing because we have such great memories, but it's something great here.
All right, more on that again. Paul Young will be on next week to talk about that and other things going on with the city. We'll switch to Overton Park. In the biggest sense, I'll go to you, Bill. There's a whole lot going on. As always, I have to note that I am currently on the board. I'm chair of the board of the Overton Park Conservancy, which is a part of the park, the forest and the green spaces and the greensward certainly. But there's a lot of news. This time, it doesn't really involve the Conservancy. It doesn't involve the zoo. It involves the Brooks, which I don't think we've had a chance to talk about on the show, but people know that the Brooks is looking at this move downtown. We talked about it with some folks, I think, last week, and with the mayor recently, that moving downtown to a site where the fire station is, overlooking the river, a really, sort of transformative big project, leaving behind the facility in Overton Park. And then, a week or so ago, Memphis College of Art, it had been rumored and had been talked about, announced that they're going to close their doors. So they're going to finish out kind of the students who are there. It's a 2-year wind down. They just found, your article, I read articles in the Flyer, I've seen the statements. It's just not a business model that's working for them.
Yeah. So what's actually happened, and I never thought I would see the day, but the issue of zoo parking has actually taken a back seat in all of this. So meanwhile, the plans for that zoo expanded parking area are taking shape, and that's moving forward. At the same time, the Conservancy is, as you know, has embarked on a park master plan just in time for the Brooks surfacing with the plans to leave the park, and they're talking with the city about a riverfront location. And then added to that, the Memphis College of Art. 2 very iconic buildings in the life of Overton Park, 2 very iconic institutions in the history of the park. So there are a whole world of possibilities that now open up with this, and a whole series of discussions. What happens with what I call the marble box that has been the only home that the Brooks Museum has ever had in its 100 years of existence. What happens with the Memphis College of Arts building that has been the home of that institution since the late 1950s? That was designed by Roy Harover, a very familiar looking design done by an architect who's done a lot of landmark work here in the city.
Yeah. Toby, your thoughts on all this?
Well, just the other thing is that the City of Memphis General Services is going to move out of that southeast lot over there, and that's going to free up, 16 acres of parkland on that corner too. So, last year, if we were on this show, we would have been talking that there's no space, zero space at Overton Park whatsoever, and then all of a sudden, there's all these things opening up, and it's been kind of a wild ride to watch, and it's going to be a really interesting, challenging future, I think, for the leaders of the park over there. We'll see how they're doing it. But who could have imagined that the Brooks and that MCA might have been looking to leave, and MCA too. I mean, they're like a lot of these kind of colleges around. It's not just them. It's a lot of these small art colleges around the country having the same issues.
And part of what hit them was a combination of things. The recession certainly hits in the middle of this. They had expanded. They bought a building downtown on South Front,
South Main.
South Main, thank you. That was where they had their graduate programs. They then had pulled back from that. That's about to be turned into a hotel. But they bought some housing along Poplar on what would that be? The south side of Poplar. There's a fair amount of debt, and I think that was part of the problem. And then they did not have the student population or the admission population to support the debt. I think they'd gone around and tried to look at some partnerships and so on. And then finally the board made the tough decision to close it down. And
there are some possibilities. I think the one that has been talked about the most and it came up pretty much immediately as soon as Brooks made its decision to move toward moving on the riverfront is that the Brooks that's left in the park, the building, may be the home for an Eggleston museum, which we've certainly heard a lot of discussion about over the years. A museum with the archives of the photographer William Eggleston in it, which had been talked about going onto the city maintenance yard once it's cleared out on the East Parkway side. Well, suddenly you have several possible sites for that in the park.
Yeah. We'll move on to some other news there, and again, we'll do another show. I mean, you're writing, everybody's writing about it, and it is interesting with everything going on with the buildings. The last thought from me on that is the amount of rumors and then the conspiracy theories on social media. I mean, it is interesting to have been through my work with the park and some off-the-record conversations. There's more of a plan than it sometimes seems, I think, publicly. But it is obviously it's a real shot to the gut and the psyche when two institutions like that look like they're just up and leaving simultaneously. Excuse me. We'll move to elections. We got it is an election year next year, Bill, and it's going to be one that's a pretty big deal between the governor's race. Now the Senate race is going to be a big deal with Corker dropping out, and we've got local county mayor race that's looking more and more interesting. Where do you want to start?
I'll start with the local races, the races for a county office, because those are the races that are now starting to come to life. Between now and Thanksgiving, a lot of these candidates in these local county races are coming out and saying, hey, I'm declaring I'm running for this, because what they're doing is getting voters' attention at this point before the holidays kick in, and then on the other side of the holidays, they'll be back and start what I call the hand-to-hand campaigning. You can't pull out you can't pull a qualifying petition until a couple of weeks from now, and the primaries for the county offices are in May. So that's kind of the timeline that we're dealing with. August is the primaries for the state and federal offices, and you're going to see some very spirited local races. There are all kinds of theories and axioms about what having a race for governor and a race for the U.S. Senate, two statewide races on the ballot, means. Which party does it benefit? Basically, you are going to see a pretty heavy influence of what's happening in Washington on these elections and the nature of how the two parties go about those races.
And part of that, I mean, that could reflect back on these local races is if former Democratic Governor Phil Bredesen gets in the race for Senate, right? That is, And Democrats are out there hoping, because one, he's a very wealthy guy, so he could put a lot of money into it. He's got name recognition and positive numbers with independents and even some Republicans.
Right, and at this point, it's just being bandied about. He's not said one way or the other. He said, "I'm going to leave it as a prospect," and kind of left it on the table. But that's left some others in a holding pattern. I know Andy Burke is the mayor of Chattanooga. He's kind of pulling back to see what Bredesen is going to do. But you know, they look at his numbers. I was reading this morning. In 2006, Bredesen Democrat won all 95 counties in Tennessee, and that's just unheard of these days. And you know, he's 73. He's been out of the spotlight for a little while, and if he came back, that would really shake up that race and show any sign of life at all on the Democratic side.
On the other side of this, with the Republicans, you have what shapes up to be a pretty fractious race in the Republican Senate primary between Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn and former Congressman Stephen Fincher. And you have two very conservative candidates in that primary, but very different kinds of conservatism in it. In the governor's race, you have a six-way race in the Republican primary, and there are already some sparks among several of the contenders in that as well. So pretty lively on both sides of this. Actually, the Democratic primary for governor appears to be kind of the most placid of the contest we're
Carl
talking
Dean,
about.
the former mayor of Nashville, is pretty far ahead. I'm looking at results from MTSU, did a poll recently. He was very far ahead of Craig Fitzhugh, who's the House member, the state House member from the Jackson,
From
West
Ripley.
Tennessee. Ripley, thank you.
The closest thing to a Memphis contender in any of these races.
But there was, again, to this MTSU poll, I mean, you talked about the 6 people for Republicans for governor. You've got Diane Black, you've got Beth Harwell, you've got Randy Boyd, you've got May Beavers, Bill Lee, and I'm probably leaving somebody out there, but all having, you know, this poll just looked at, do you have positive views of them? They were all, do you have name recognition? It was interesting. It's going to be a tight race. They're doing forums now, right? They've started doing some debating, some forums. That will heat up, especially right after the first of the year.
Yeah, they've done 2 where you've had all 6 there, and you really have a lot of different views on this, and you have a lot of sparks in particular between Diane Black and between Randy Boyd. In that race, that'll spread out over time.
And you've got, somebody pointed out to me, you've got the whole dynamic, we talked about the national influence, when Donald Trump is tweeting, who, you know, May Beavers is probably more in the Donald Trump camp of conservatism. She's a state Senate member, but he was tweeting very positive things, I think, recently about Diane Black, who's the Republican conservative House member from somewhere around the Nashville area.
From Gallatin.
Gallatin, thank you. I mean, that Trump enters the race on some level in Tennessee.
Absolutely, and it'll be interesting to watch. And you know, if you want to look at the county mayor election, even, you know, when you've got Terry Rowland, who was his guy, and was he the overall
West
Tennessee, just West Tennessee? You know, heating up that race, and a lot of folks have that right now as kind of Terry Rowland and Lee Harris. And then probably David Lenore, you know, but Terry Rowland is certainly the far right contender in that race. And Jackson Baker was writing that race could get shaken up later with some other shoes to drop. He wrote this week that maybe Shay Flynn would run as an independent, and maybe Harold Byrd, the Bank of Bartlett president. So there's still, a lot of shoes to drop this season.
And Lee Harris, did we say that already? Sorry if you did. Lee Harris, the Democratic, used to be city council, now state senator. He declared on the Democratic side, which is also in.
He's been running for 3 weeks. He's now doing fundraisers, and in fact, he told a group of supporters this week in Victorian Village that the Trump model for government, which he described as break things, is going to be a heavy influence on what happens in that race.
And last here, just with a couple minutes left, I think people maybe have seen, we made note of it on last week's show because we had pre-taped that show. We couldn't get a full segment in. Vernell Smith, who is the publisher of the Tri-State Defender, a frequent member of this roundtable when we would do these roughly once a month, passed away. Just a tragedy. I was shocked. I think everybody was shocked. 45 years old, 3 children, wife. I mean, it was just so awful and so shocking. Thoughts, Bill?
Well, I think his contribution, first of all, in resurrecting the new tri-state defender, people who aren't in the business, I don't think know what a big achievement just that was. But he also took his place in what I think all of us have been trying to do in the last 10 years or so, and that is push ahead this new reality in print media in this town, and that there's no longer just one dominant voice about the way things go and the way things ought to be. Editorially, there are many voices, and all of us have been a part of that, and Brunel really helped to bring that new day closer.
Toby, thoughts?
I just love what Bill said, and I believe every bit of it. Personally, I met him right here on this stage, and I've gotten to know him over the years. I admired the way the man thought. He thought clearly, spoke clearly, and sometimes unabashedly. Sometimes he was unafraid to get out there and say things that needed to be said. He is missed.
Yeah, it is to what Bill's saying. I mean, this model of he was an advocate publisher, and he was very much, I mean, it didn't matter where Brunel was everywhere. I mean,
Yes.
You'd see him at business events, you'd see him at civic events. He was listening, and he was a local guy. I mean, Rhodes graduate, and to be at his funeral, Natalie Chandler and I, the producer of the show, went. It was an amazing celebration. His friends, and it was very sad, but it was an amazing celebration. But again, and we tried to have Karanja Ajanaku, the editor of Tri-State Associate Publisher. He could not. He wanted to be here, but couldn't do that. But it is an interesting time in local media. I mean, local. The CA, I think the newsroom now is under 30 by what count of someone told me recently. So I think that is the model, as Bill said, that going forward, and it'll be interesting to see. But that is all the time we have. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for joining us. Join us again next week.
So for the interim, until they have time to devote to that, they're going to concentrate on some other parts of the plan. And much to, I think, a lot of people's surprise, a lot of those other parts are not on the fairgrounds proper. They're outside of the fairgrounds boundaries in the neighborhoods around it. Orange Mound is what comes to mind immediately. There's an access issue there because there is a railroad yard between the fairgrounds and Orange Mound to the south. Well, the city wants to improve the entrances that go under the railroad yard into the neighborhoods. It also
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Mothballing the Coliseum, changes at Overton Park, and remembering Brunel Smith. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined.
Right. The city, the administration of Mayor Jim Strickland says that they really don't see a plan at this point that they want to go down the road on and start operations, and actually operating the Coliseum again as an active venue plays into this, because the city said before we do that, before we have this ongoing expense, we want to make sure we've got the best plan, and they're just not sure that being part of a youth sports facility or complex on the fairgrounds is actually the direction that they want to go with the Coliseum. There might be some other direction. Is going to explore using Old Melrose High School as some kind of facility that's connected to what happens at the fairgrounds in terms of youth sports tournaments. But the really big philosophical thing here is that the city is trying to balance hosting these tournaments, which bring in a lot of money and a lot of people from out of town for regional and national sports and amateur tournaments, with everyday use by Memphians. Because right out of the gate during the Harrington administration and into the Wharton administration, they made such a push about these tournaments.
Tonight by Toby Sells, news editor at the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Eric.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. We'll talk about, there's a whole lot of news going on. I think the lead story, though, Bill, is the proposal, which we'll get into more next week with Paul Young from the city of Memphis when he's on the show. But the city has started to roll out its plan for the fairgrounds, and that includes the Coliseum. And I think for a lot of people, the Coliseum's the headline, because the mayor's proposal, and I'll let you fill in the details, is essentially to mothball the Coliseum. Not tear it down, but also not put the money into it from this TDZ, this Tourism Development Zone, that some people wanted. So tell us about the Coliseum situation, then we'll go into some of the other parts of the plan of the fairgrounds.